everybody, and welcome to the Fairfield Museum. My name is Heather Maxson, and I'm the Deputy Director for Programs here. And it's a delight to see all of you out on this nice evening. We are so excited to partner with the Fairfield League of Women Voters to kick off the free multi-part series. Tonight is called Spotlight on Redistricting and Your Vote. The series begins tonight with It's Your Vote They're Talking About, which will focus on the 2020 census, redistricting rules, and examine vote geography and political interest. Here at the Fairfield Museum, we believe in the power of the arts and humanities to inspire imagination, stimulate thought, and transform society. Through dynamic programs and exhibitions, the Fairfield Museum sparks dialogue, inspires meaningful collaborations like this, and deliberates the challenges of the future. Central to our community-focused mission is the desire to provide important historical context to pressing issues of our time, and to offer a safe, trustworthy environment where multiple perspectives can be heard and collective solutions explored. This is why programs like this are so important. It's critical to a healthy democracy to have an informed and active citizenry, such as yourself, and to believe that we can work together to enact social change. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce Bryce Perry, the co-president of the League, and she will tell you more about this evening's program. And thank you to all my partners at the League for working so hard to put on this event. And thanks for coming this evening.
I always have to put it a lot lower. I'm a little person. On behalf of the League of Women Voters, I'd like to welcome you to our first installment of a 5-part series, Spotlight on Redistricting and Your Vote. When we looked at the depth and complexity of today's current issues, we decided that one presentation was not enough to do these critical issues justice. We developed our series concept, partnered with the museum, and here we are. Tonight's program is Redistricting Is Your Vote They're Talking About. Our second session, November 18th, is Redistricting How Is It Done?, presented by faculty and students of Fairfield University. The third session is December 7th, and it's Redistricting in the News, with a panel of journalists with different perspectives to share. Your handouts have more information about all the sessions. We hope you'll join us for all of them. After our program tonight, we'll have a Q&A session, and there are cards available. I think everybody got one on their way in. If you need another one, raise your hand. And if you've written one and want to submit it, raise your hand and one of us will collect it. We'll submit those at the end. The League of Women Voters is a nonpartisan organization that promotes education and participation in democracy. We're also nonprofit, but I like to say no profit. Just saying. But we do gladly accept donations, and we have a donation jar out in the lobby if you are so inclined. Also, there's membership information, sign-up sheets if you'd like to join. If you're not already a member and would like to join, please join us. We'd love to have you. We are so pleased to have Joan Twiggs and David Daley here tonight for our kickoff. Joan Twiggs is on the board of the Greater Hartford League of Women Voters and is advocacy director. As an at-large director for League of Women Voters Connecticut, she serves as champion for the National League's People-Powered Fair Maps redistricting campaign, an initiative advocating the creation of fair political maps nationwide. Joan has a long history with the League of Women Voters as the editor of the League's Report from the Hill, a lobbyist covering the League's international relations portfolio, and now on the board of directors of our state league. Joan has a master's degree in public policy from University of Maryland and a PhD in sociology from UConn. No, not too shabby. Thank you, Joan, for joining us tonight. David Daley is the author of the national bestseller, Why Your Vote Doesn't Count, and Unrigged, How Americans Are Battling Back to Save Democracy. David's work on voting rights and democracy issues has been published in The New Yorker, The New York Times, The Washington Post, and other top publications, and became the basis for the award-winning documentary, Slay the Dragon. His efforts contributed to the citizenship question being struck from the 2020 census. David has taught political science and journalism at Wesleyan, Boston College, and the University of Georgia. We are so pleased to have him with us tonight. So enough about this, the intro. Let's get to the stuff. Joan, welcome.
Right. Well, thank you. Can you hear me? Can you hear me now? Yes, great. Thank you very much, Bryce. And I want to start by thanking everyone for being here, and to the Fairfield League of Women Voters, and in particular, Sandra Blum, Bryce Perry, Linda Strohmeyer, Helen DeVanzo, Beth Johnston, and Barbara Thumb for initiating and organizing this multi-part series on a topic that is so often not in the public eye. Thank you for inviting me to help open this series. And thank you to the Fairfield Museum and History Center, and in particular, Michael Daley and Heather Maxson, for welcoming us here this evening and providing such great accommodations. And of course, thank you to those of you who are here in attendance. Now, before we jump right into redistricting, I do want to say just a couple of words about the League of Women Voters, and in this election season, our online election information website called Vote 411. And I've run into my first problem, which is advancing the slide. Doesn't seem to be this carrot.
Go to from beginning. From beginning.
Aha. The wrong carrot. So here we are. This is the League of Women Voters a palette. So if you would, the United States. The League was founded February 14, 1920, by leaders of the women's suffrage movement. Carrie Chapman Catt, the then president of the National American Women's Suffrage Association, was the founder and the first president of the League of Women Voters. Today, the League is organized at 3 levels: national, state, and local. We're organized in all 50 states, and here in Connecticut, we have about 25 chapters. The League, as Bryce said, is nonpartisan. We never support or oppose candidates or parties. The League is well known for conducting voter service activities and producing materials to help inform voters about candidates and issues. So, for example, we produce voter guides, we host debates and town forums, and the League also undertakes issue advocacy. For example, the League supports current voting rights legislation, such as the Freedom to Vote bill. The League's mission is to empower voters and defend democracy, and as Bryce said, we do invite you to join us. Membership is open to everyone. So this is a screenshot from our election information system website. Election Vote 411 is an award-winning website, and it provides many different tools for the voter, including those that are represented there. But what I want to highlight today are the personalized voting information, the voter guides. And as you can see, a user is able to put in their address, that's my address, and when they hit submit, then what comes up, well, let's try this. Okay, Heather.
Here it comes. Why is it not behaving?
I don't know. Okay, thank you. So what comes up on the website is the personalized voting guide for the address that was just entered. And on the left, you can see that in Bloomfield, where I live, central Connecticut, we have 2 local elections, of course this year's municipal elections, for which we have voter guides, the Board of Education and the Town Council. The user selects one of those, and I selected the Town Council, and then we come to the page shown there on the right, And it goes down further. We have 12 candidates. And the candidates are shown when they've answered. It's usually the picture is a signifier that they have gone in and they've uploaded their own information and answers to the voter guide questions that the league prepared. And that's available for citizens, for voters to see. Additionally, you can see right under Bloomfield Town Council, it says your sample ballot, so we've uploaded the sample ballot for the voter to see so that they know what they'll be looking at on November 2nd. So that's vote 411, and it's starting to get a good deal of both state and national attention, and we think it's a great opportunity as an infrastructure to be able to spread voter guides across jurisdictions, even where there aren't local leagues. Okay. So now let's move into redistricting. And I want to start by acknowledging the land history of where we meet. So this map shows the places in Connecticut that are the traditional lands of 20 indigenous nations. And of course, the name of our state is an anglicized version of a Mohegan Pequot word meaning long tidal river. In preparing for today's remarks, I learned that Fairfield celebrated its 375th anniversary in 2014, and that the museum was very involved in activities that year. I learned that the town that we now call Fairfield was called Unkaway by the native people who lived here. And from historian Thomas Farnham, I learned that this was home to the Pequot Indians and to the multiple groups that collectively were known as the Pequannock Indians. And you can see where the Pequannock section is on the map. So for me, reflecting on history always reminds me that today's social and political institutions are also contingent and subject to change. And it reinforces, this reflection reinforces the importance of us all being engaged in shaping the communities in which we live. So, turning now to the League's campaign. The Supreme Court issued 2 decisions in June of 2019 about redistricting, and it made clear that they were taking a hands-off approach to redistricting. And with that, the League took these decisions as a call to action. They created the people-powered Fair Maps campaign, and they began organizing campaigns in all 50 states. The strategies that are deployed in each state depend on the situation in each state, and I will be telling you more about the Connecticut plan. But first, let's just think for a moment, why is the League of Women Voters involved? How does this connect to the League's mission? And I think this quote from National League CEO Virginia K. Solomon tells us that districts are related to voters having their voices heard. Redistricting is a fundamental process in creating conditions that either encourage or deter voting, as well as other forms of citizen participation. And after all, haven't we all heard expressions like this, which all come down to the idea, my vote doesn't count, so why vote? And this is fundamentally why redistricting is at the heart of the League's mission of empowering voters and defending democracy. Here are some topics that I'm going to touch on quickly, and I'm going to move along at a faster pace, but this is what we're going to learn just a little bit about tonight. So we start with the very simple question, what is a district? I think everyone in this room likely knows a district is a segment of the state from which a representative to our government is elected. And so they are often referred to as representational districts. And we have, really 4 levels of districts in our state. On the left, we have our congressional districts. We have 5 of them. In the middle, those are the 36 state Senate districts. And then on the right, the 151 state House districts. Of course, we also have local level districts called voting districts. And these can be districts that affect votes, especially when a district is representational as they are in large cities. In Bloomfield, we have at-large districts but in other states, in other places, they are representational. The high-level timeline, we know that redistricting occurs every 10 years. It follows the census. We'll be talking about the connection a bit more. And the Connecticut district map plan must be in place by February 15 of next year. So then the question is, okay, so we've got these little puzzle pieces, and how do they get drawn? And that really is the key question of redistricting. And I've divided these criteria into two sets, what I call the big three, and then additional criteria that are used, that are also used or referred to. So the big three is population equality. Districts at each level need to be of the same size. So the way that is created is the census. Here we are, the attachment to the census. The census tells us what the state's population is. That is divided by the number of districts at any given level. So it's the state population divided by 5, gives us the ideal size of the congressional district, and it's the same process for each level. It's the state population divided by 36 or divided by 151. This is established in the U.S. Constitution. Now, this has not always been the case. The requirement for population equality came about in the 1960s through a series of court cases. Prior to that time, districts could be and were different sizes. And so through these court cases that included Supreme Court cases, the courts determined that this unequal size violated the principle of equal representation, saying that citizens that lived in a state, for example, hypothetical district rather, of 50 people would have greater access to their representative and so to their government than did citizens who lived in a hypothetical district of 1,000 people. So that's when equal population came, and it was established by the Constitution interpretation. The congressional districts have to be very close to the same size. In congressional districts, the deviation is really less than 1%. In state districts, it can be larger, and it can be as up to 10%, although my understanding is that that figure is not ironclad. Districts cannot overtly be drawn with the result of violating or being discriminatory, racially discriminatory. And that is the result of the drawing, not the intention. So even where there was no intention, but district map that ends up in being discriminatory they have been thrown out in courts. Contiguity shape means that the district line has to be continuous with special provisions for rivers and islands. And the Connecticut and many other states use this as a criterion. So these are the three big criteria, but there are others. Competitiveness. So we saw in the little hypothetical bubbles of people's reactions, oh, my candidate always wins, why vote? My candidate can't win, why vote? That's what that means. Compactness of shape. Some people argue that compactness, that geographic compactness, people who live closer to one another, that is consistent with their interests. Preservation of multiple lines, that's certainly something that we pay attention to here in Connecticut and adhere to it when possible, but it's not always possible. And then communities of interest. And that means people who have issues that may be similar within their communities. So I think that the main point of this is to try to bring into the conversation the point that this is not a process that can be fed into a computer with the result coming out. It's not a recipe. The big three are necessary, but then the application of these other criteria may cause some tension. So for example, just let's think about communities of interest and compactness of shape. So here we are in Fairfield, we're on the shore. You might think, well, there's a community of interest having to do with the shoreline, and that shoreline may not adhere to compactness of shape. So that is really the main point to understand. And that's also why it's so important for all of us to be involved. So this slide says what the League's position is on redistricting. The first thing is the League supports independent redistricting commissions. So the League would prefer that redistricting be done in a nonpartisan manner by the public, including public, general public, also organizations within a state, but really separated from the political processes. The League says that all districting approaches at all levels should be fully open and transparent and include the public with published timelines. And you can see then we go into the different criteria, the ones to require, well, those are the three that I've just talked about. Then here, criteria to bring in when not in conflict with other criteria. And then at the bottom, I want to draw your attention to the criteria to explicitly reject protection of incumbents and preferential treatment for a political party. So now, let's just look at Connecticut's redistricting process and ask how well it comports with the League's position. And on the left of the slide are key elements of the process, and on the right are some of the timeline. The timeline actually starts earlier than this, but I've truncated it to basically where we are now. So you can see that, first of all, our process is stipulated in our Constitution. So that tells all of us here from Connecticut that changing that Constitution is not an easy, certainly not an easy process. So it's embedded in the Constitution. It centers on the legislature rather than the public. It is bipartisan. So what the Constitution, the Connecticut Constitution says is that redistricting will be undertaken by a bipartisan committee. And and it provides for thresholds if the committee is unable to produce the results needed. So it's a tiered process. It starts in this bipartisan reapportionment committee. If they are unable to produce the needed maps, it moves to a reapportionment commission. And then if they are unsuccessful, the Connecticut Supreme Court can be involved. So let's see where we are. Well, September 15 has passed. And that was the deadline by which 2/3 of Connecticut House and Senate must have approved a map plan created by this bipartisan committee. So in other words, the committee needed to have produced maps, and they needed to have been approved by a supermajority, and if not, then we were going to go to the next level. Well, we have to say that the committee had very little chance to meet this threshold because the census data was not provided until August 12th. So the committee did hold about a week's worth of, it held 4 public hearings. Leagues testified in those hearings, but it did not achieve this goal. And so now we are at the reapportionment commission stage. And at this stage, 8 of those members have been named. They are the leaders of the legislature, and 1 more needs to be appointed to get to an uneven number of 9. So then we go to the next threshold, which is not too far away, November 30th, and there we're looking for a simple majority of the commission, 5 votes, to approve a plan. And when I say a plan, I'm talking about all 3 levels, the congressional maps, the state house, and the state senate. And if that's not achieved, then the Supreme Court gets involved, and they they can compel the commission to agree on a plan. They may also actually appoint a special master to draw a map or maps. And then again, here by February 2015, there must be a plan in place. The link down here is the link to the General Assembly Reapportionment Commission. I think we're going to do questions toward at the end. Yes, thank you. So what have we done at the League? Well, first of all, I want to mention incarceration gerrymandering and the action that took place this past session. Incarceration gerrymandering means the counting, enumerating incarcerated people at the site of the facility, the prison, rather than their home communities. And the League, along with the NAACP, Common Cause, ACLU, a League has opposed incarceration gerrymandering, and this year, on a really strong bipartisan basis, it was really terrific, Connecticut ended that practice. The second piece here gets into what is our particular people-powered fair maps plan, and it involves both our educational efforts, but also our messaging. What is it that we are urging? And it's greater transparency and public engagement. We think that there are a lot more opportunities, even inside a constitutional approach, to really increase and amplify both what's happening in the committee, but also creating a two-way kind of communication with the public. An opportunity that includes, for instance, just creating a more modern and website that has more information. Redistricting only happens every 10 years. So it's every 10 years you're having, in large part, new people that need to learn about the process, and we think our state could do a lot more in that regard. In terms of our educational efforts, we've done community presentations, we've offered sort of tutorials on Day's redistricting application, which is a mapping application through which you can do both your own mapping but also analysis. And when I came on as People-Powered Fair Maps champion in July, I needed to bring myself up to speed, and so I produced a 5-part blog series that I made public and is posted on our Connecticut website. And then, of course, I have to bring out the Fairfield, the League of Women Voters of Fairfield, this Spotlight On series, because it's such a fantastic attention to this topic. So as I mentioned, the local leagues and league members were active during the testimony, and I thought, what better way, since redistricting is in large part involves maps, I thought, what better way to put the spotlight on their activism than create a map myself. So I did. And I'm showing you a screenshot from it. So we have little league icons. Wherever there was activity, there's a league icon. And in this view, I've selected the Fairfield League. There is the Spotlight On series, Redistricting Your Vote, and the league's website. And this, too, is posted on the, available through the Connecticut League's website. I can't end without saying what you can do now. Redistricting is continuing. We haven't finished, and there's still advocacy that you can take. And we are urging that you reach out to your Connecticut and Senate, the Connecticut House and Senate members, to ask that the Reapportionment Commission conduct their business transparently, but also to say to your representatives, we need to have plans for more transparency during every redistricting cycle. And the League believes that we could establish much better open government and public engagement provisions. And for specific suggestions, then I would alert you to the link shown here, which is one of our action alerts. So I'm going to end where I began, which is to thank you. That's my email. I'm always happy to hear from members, supporters, and friends, so please reach out. And then that second URL is our Connecticut League People-Powered Fair Maps page. Thanks so much.
I think they'll all be right here. Let's see. I just don't see where mine are. I'm sorry.
Okay, is this yours or no?
There we go.
And then it's this one. Perfect. Thank you.
Thank you for coming out. It is so nice to do one of these. It's not on Zoom. It's not. Absolutely. It's nice to not be in my pajamas, wearing a nice shirt. I want to thank the League and the museum and everybody, all of you, for being here. It is a pleasure. This is a terrific series. I want to talk a little bit about the history of gerrymandering, about why this is so important, how it has changed over the course of the last decade, how we got here effectively. Talk a little bit about the state of play as we enter the 2021 redistricting cycle. I'll give you a few things to look out for. When you draw the lines, you can make the rules, right? There's a lot of different ways to crack and pack 50 people into different districts and to make it very fair and very unfair. Districts should belong to the voters. They are the building blocks of our democracy, and when they get twisted by partisans of either side, and both parties have got a long history of misbehavior here, they can warp the very nature of representative democracy. How districts are drawn, who draws them, where lines are placed, whether or not a map is responsive or not to the will of the people. It can make all the difference between representation with the consent of the governed and our own form of entrenched minority rule. And when those lines get distorted and warped, drawn to lock in a decade-long partisan advantage, it distorts our politics, it sends unrepresentative delegations to Washington, it pushes policy to the extreme, damages the notion of meaningful elections, and it has helped make voting rights itself a bipartisan issue as recently as 2006, when a Republican Congress and Republican president reauthorized the Voting Rights Act by nearly bipartisan acclamation in Congress, a contentious issue. We redraw these lines every 10 years, as Joan talked about, after the census, and so we are in the thick of redistricting right now. We have seen in recent days from Texas, from Ohio, from Oregon, from Georgia, extreme partisan gerrymanders emerging, sometimes flouting states' own constitutions, nearly certain to spark litigation from multiple parties. This is a uniquely American problem. We are the only modern democracy that allows politicians to draw their own lines and choose their own voters. Believe me, they like it that way. As long as we have had politicians, they have worked very hard to keep that power. And before we called it gerrymandering, Patrick Henry tries to draw a map to keep James Madison out of our very first Congress. Gerrymandering gets its name from Elbridge Gerry, hard G, governor of Massachusetts in 1812. His party, the Democratic Republican Party, draws the state Senate districts. I know it's showing up on my screen, but it's not showing on your screen. Yeah, there we go. Gary's party draws the state Senate districts around Boston in such a wild way that a political cartoonist takes one look at that map and says it looks like a salamander, and so the gerrymander is born. This map works as intended. The Federalists won 60% of the vote in the 1812 Senate elections in Boston. Gary's Democratic Republican Party won the majority of the seats. So in the 20th century, politicians often take advantage of the redistricting process conveniently by simply not doing it. Of the 48 states we had in 1930 and 1940, only 7 of them redistricted after both censuses. Oregon did not redistrict between 1907 and 1960. Illinois did not between 1910 and 1955. Alabama and Tennessee stopped in 1901. It's not long, right, after both states established black codes and other Jim Crow laws designed to strip the right to vote that black citizens won with the post-Civil War Reconstruction amendments. 3 landmark cases at the Supreme Court, and I should be able to have learned from what just happened here a second ago as I try to move this along. It is moving on my computer. It is moving up here. It's just not reflecting up there. I'm sorry. You had 3 landmark Supreme Court cases that took this on back in the 1960s. Baker versus Carr, which establishes redistricting as a justiciable question under the 14th Amendment. It allows the court to get involved and review redistricting issues. And then Reynolds versus Sims and Westbury versus Sanders followed closely thereafter. creating this idea of equal population. These are the one-person, one-vote cases. And Reynolds versus Sims is a really important and easily understandable way to understand how central redistricting is to political power. It arose from a challenge to Alabama's legislative system, which allowed one senator per county. But of course, all of the counties have different population. And in Alabama at the time, most of the black voters lived in Birmingham or in Montgomery. The city was one county. And so you would have tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people with one representative, but then they'd be easily outnumbered by these smaller rural counties. It's got obvious racial and political implications. This is Chief Justice Warren in Reynolds versus Sims. The right to vote for the candidate of one's choice is of the essence of a democratic society, and any restrictions on that right strike at the heart of representative government. And the right of suffrage, and I think this is terrific, can be denied by a debasement or dilution of the weight of a citizen's vote just as effectively as by wholly prohibiting the free exchange exercise of the franchise. That's what gerrymandering is. It's both a debasement and a dilution of the weight of a citizen's vote. In the decades since, unfortunately, we have not solved this problem. Sophisticated partisans and more recent courts have only made it worse. Unfortunately, we are better at gerrymandering than we've ever been by most measures. Most of the statewide plans that were drawn in the last decade have rated as some of the most partisan and unrepresentative of the modern era. Harvard has a project called the Electoral Integrity Project. One of the things it rates is the integrity of district lines in individual states. There have been years this decade in which Wisconsin and North Carolina have gotten a 3 and a 4 on a scale of 1 to 100. That's not good. It's so not good, it's worse than any nation in the world on this project. So the integrity of the district lines in North Carolina and Wisconsin has been judged worse than Venezuela or countries we think of as hardly being democracies at all. So this is one of the most powerful forces in American politics. And as we enter this redistricting year, you've got 5 seats that separate the two parties in Congress. The redistricting that's taking place right now could very well determine who controls Congress for a decade and how much individual votes and districts matter at all. So not only are the gerrymanders more sophisticated than ever before, but citizens have perhaps fewer tools at their disposal to try to stop it. The Supreme Court indeed has withdrawn from this debate in 2019. They called gerrymandering a non-justiciable political issue. In short, they left the question of the fairness of district lines and legislative maps to the very electoral process that dilutes and debases votes and tilts those maps. It's also the first redistricting cycle since the Shelby County decision in 2013, which effectively ended preclearance from Section 5 of the Voting Rights Act. So you had a number of states, particularly southern states, but not entirely, that had to run these maps past the Department of Justice to be certain that they did not dilute the votes of racial minorities. That does not have to happen this time. So why has this become such a problem now? Let me suggest a couple of reasons. Elbridge Gerry wouldn't recognize the tools that are being used to draw these gerrymanders today, but neither would the folks who were drawing these maps as recently as 2000. Technology allows for gerrymandering on steroids. Today's extreme gerrymanders involve terabytes of voter data, sophisticated geographic information system software, supercomputers, armies of lawyers, consultants, technicians. The computers are faster, the data is more precise, our voting patterns are easier to predict in this era of hardened polarization. The lines can be drawn with such surgical precision that the party in charge holds a decade-long advantage. Indeed, in Pennsylvania, Ohio, Florida, North Carolina, Michigan, Wisconsin, 6 swing states, all redistricted by the same party in 2011. They held both chambers of the state legislature for the last 10 years, sometimes even when they won hundreds of thousands fewer votes. And so the maps that were drawn in 2010 are still tilting Congress and state houses today, a decade later, even as we move into another decade of redrawing these maps. Technology allows for opportunity, but that opportunity has to be identified. And Republicans recognized these possibilities sooner than Democrats, and they crafted their return to power after Barack Obama's 2008 sweep through redistricting. Almost no one noticed, not journalists, not political scientists, certainly not the Democrats. Republicans spotted this first because, frankly, they just gotten beaten pretty solidly 2 elections in a row. You had a supermajority of Democrats in the U.S. Senate, big numbers nationwide, and after the 2008 election, people talking about Democratic coalitions and changing nature of demographics in the country, perhaps making Republicans a minority party for a generation. And it didn't exactly work that way. And one of the key reasons why is redistricting. They came up with a really savvy, sophisticated plan. In about 80% of our states, it's the state legislatures that draw the congressional lines. So what if you study the rules in all of those states, figure out how to lock the other side out of the process in as many states as possible? They called this Red Map. And one of these times I will learn how to do this. They call this Red Map, and it's an apt acronym for the Redistricting Majority Project. You can credit a really savvy Republican strategist named Chris Jankowski with the idea and the understanding that elections in years ending in 0 simply mean more. The strategy, just go down one more. How do I do it myself from now
So
on?
don't touch this.
Oh, no.
Only touch
yeah.
this arrow to the right or to the left. Okay.
There we go.
Is that good?
Yes, this
If
is
you
great.
touch
This is
Only these 2. Okay.
a technology. It's the technology, folks, right?
It's a little tricky.
So what they did is they target these relatively inexpensive state house and Senate races nationwide with the goal of flipping legislative chambers and controlling the redistricting process in as many states as possible, then drawing themselves these friendly maps, even in blue states and purple states, for the next 10 years. And I got my hands, they were not very happy when I got my hands on the slideshow that they presented to donors, but this is how they actually pitched the project, right? You control redistricting. This is straight from their papers. If you saw the movie Moneyball, or if you read the Michael Lewis bestseller, right, it's exactly that strategy applied to politics. You find the bargain that everybody else overlooks, and in this case, it's state legislatures. And so in 2012, Democratic U.S. House candidates win 1.4 million more votes as Barack Obama is reelected and Democrats gain seats in the U.S. Senate. But Republicans hold the House, right? And Red Map's effect on the 2012 election is plain when analyzing the results. Pennsylvanians cast 83,000 more votes for Democratic U.S. House candidates than their Republican opponents, but elected a 13-5 Republican majority to represent them in Washington. Michiganders cast over 240,000 more votes for Democratic congressional candidates than Republicans, but still elected a 9-5 Republican delegation to Congress. Nationwide, Republicans won 54% of the U.S. House seats, along with 58 of 99 state legislative chambers, while winning only 8 of 33 U.S. Senate races and carrying only 47.8% of the national presidential vote. That's not me talking about the importance of this. That's a paragraph from the Republican Red Map special report that came out right after the 2012 election. It's their own analysis of how important and central redistricting was to holding political power. In many ways, this is one of the greatest heists in modern American history, and it's a bargain. They only spent $30 million on Red Map. I mean, Linda McMahon spent that much money to lose two seats in the U.S. Senate, right? Twice. For $30 million, Republicans bought a big advantage in the House, and just as important, right, these huge supermajorities in blue and purple state legislatures in all of these states we keep talking about. Democrats fell asleep, believed their own press, thought they were going to be able to coast on these demographic changes forever. In my new book, I talk with Eric Holder about the 2012 election, and I asked him, when did you first understand Red Map and what it was? And he told me that a couple of weeks after the election, he and President Obama were standing outside the Oval Office, and they were talking about the night's returns, and he said, they were bewildered. He said, we thought we had done really well in terms of the raw vote, but it wasn't at all reflected in the number of representatives that we had at the state and federal level. So what's going on? Red map had been a small part of my consciousness. I'd heard the phrase, but it wasn't anything I had focused on. And then we saw the election results. And so the lesson in many ways of the last decade is that when you have control, it's easier to keep control. Before Red Map, this is what partisan control looks like around the country. 2009. This is what it looks like by 2017. And that's what it looks like now. It's just about exactly the same. I believe Virginia is really the only flip in there. When you have control, it's easier to keep control. And so we get to this moment in which only 5 seats separate the two political parties. We've got a dwindling number of swing seats left, very, very few remaining. The number of districts represented by a candidate of the opposite party than won the presidential election has dropped to its lowest level in 70 years. There's only 16 of those around the country left out of 435. And so in many ways, what we're seeing right now confirms that the opportunity to flip seats has moved from every other November, the way we're taught in school it ought to be, to every 10 years after the census, when you get to redraw maps and try to freeze them for your side for the next 10 years. The state of play right now is that Republicans are favored, slightly less than they were in 2011, but you can see the states that they have control versus the states where there's divided control, and then where Democrats have control, and the handful of commission states that we have. What has changed is this. Republicans will draw 187 of the 435 seats this year. Democrats will draw 75. There's joint control over 71. Commissions will draw 96. So there's a handful more states that have joint control this time than last time. Democrats won governor's races in Pennsylvania and Wisconsin, and that gave them a seat at the table. You've got more commissions in states like Colorado and Virginia and Michigan. But when we say that Republicans have the upper hand this cycle, it's not just about the number of seats that they'll draw, it's where they have control, right? This is like a Willie Keeler strategy of gerrymandering. He robbed banks famously because that's where the money is. When you're trying to gerrymander, you have to go where the seats are, and Republicans have got the keys to the safe in those key states, right? Democrats control Massachusetts and Rhode Island and Connecticut. They've got all of the seats in those states. So there's not much gain to be had if you're thinking about this from a partisan state of play, the same way Republicans can't add much in Wyoming or in Idaho. But when you look at this, right, the key competitive states where the populations are changing, where things are shifting, where it's very competitive, you're talking about Florida and North Carolina and Texas and Georgia. You can see that those are states that Republicans took control of the process last time, still have it this time, and that it may be possible to pick up a double digits of seats right there and to potentially swing the U.S. House with new maps in those states alone. What you also see from a partisan point of view is what Democrats are up to. They have already drawn themselves an extra seat in Oregon. They're talking about potentially even overriding the brand new commission in New York, which could gain them as many as 4 to 5 seats if they effectively just ignore it and have the legislature that has a supermajority of votes step in and draw their own map. But Republicans probably can pick up a couple seats in Texas, maybe 3 in North Carolina, 2 in Florida, a couple in Georgia. They've got the potential to gain some seats in Kentucky, Tennessee, Kansas, and New Hampshire. Democrats have got the opportunity in New York, Illinois, maybe 1 in Oregon, maybe 1 in New Mexico. It's still about a net 8 or 9, I would imagine, for Republicans, and with a gain of 5 seats, you take the U.S. House. So you can see just how important this is. What I think is really, really interesting is that, and this isn't intended to be a partisan observation, it's an observation about whether majorities of citizens still have the ability to make change in their government when they want to. Democratic candidates won 4.7 million more votes for the U.S. Congress in 2020, and that equated to 223 seats. If you were to rerun the 2020 election under 2022 lines, what you could see is that those shifting lines alone have the ability to move political power, and that you could have, you know, a really big majority on one side, but the power on the other side. And if you want to understand the importance of how these lines have gone over the course of the last decade and how important it is to have control over how you draw them, the most similar case when Republicans had a big margin like that, you go back to 2014 and they won by 4.3 million more votes in that year, and that added up to 247 seats. So you can see that the power to draw these lines can just be very, very important and powerful. What I think is important for us to understand is that citizens are leading the fight back against this. One of my favorite stories, I'm just back from Michigan, where they have an independent commission drawing lines this year for the very first time in a state that had been wildly gerrymandered in the last 2 or 3 decades. And a couple of days after the 2016 election, which of course was super fraught and divisive, especially in a state where it was as close as Michigan, a 27-year-old woman named Fahey was already thinking ahead to what Thanksgiving was going to be like in her house that year. And there's Trump voters and Hillary voters and still, Bernie bros, and she's imagining cranberry sauce and mashed potatoes going to be flying through the air. It was not going to be fun. And she wanted to try to come up with a topic that maybe everybody would agree on. And so she got up that Thursday morning and she went to Facebook and she posted, "I want to do something about partisan gerrymandering in Michigan. If you do too, let me know." And she added a smiley face emoji at the end of it, and maybe that's what helped. But she, off of that Facebook post alone, creates a redistricting revolution in Michigan. They go out and they generate 430,000 signatures for a constitutional amendment, 14,000 volunteers. They raise ultimately millions of dollars. They didn't know what they were doing when they started. It started on Google Sheets and just, spreadsheets and Facebook posts. And as we speak, an independent commission is drawing the lines in what had been one of the most wildly gerrymandered states in the nation. So we can make this change. When citizens come together, it's not even close, right? I mean, it was 61% of the vote it passed by in Michigan. And in 2018, you also saw constitutional amendments or new guardrails being put on the process with the same big numbers, if not bigger, in Ohio, in Utah, in Missouri, in Virginia, in Colorado. So this is red states, blue states, purple states. We all hate partisan gerrymandering and want control of this process back. And in many ways, I think this is really the everyday work of citizens. It is imagining democracy as an action, as a verb, something that we have to tend and work to perfect ourselves. That there is a lot of work to be done, but that it's the work that has built this nation at its best and can still sustain us, and that this is the work that we must do in order to renew the determination that the American ideals still resonate and work for everyone, we can do this work together. Thank you all for being here tonight.
Thank you very much, both of you. I can understand a little bit better now the title of your first book. So, David, this question's for you. Is there conflict at the federal level between the big criteria of population equality and the limit on the size of the House of Representatives?
That definitely helps. You know, we have not increased the size of the House for, whoever asked that question probably knows the specific year, but it's been in at least 100 years, I think. We've been at 435, and the country has, of course, grown, so each of these districts is bigger and includes more people, and that, I think, has certainly in many ways contributed to how stuck these maps are in so many states. And when these lines are so crucial and have so much at stake, you're going to have partisans trying to hijack the process every step of the way. And so if you had more districts, if you had a more proportional approach, I do think you would probably see better results. I think all of these, and that's what's so fascinating about redistricting in many ways, is that a lot of the criteria, as Joan talked about, can be really conflicting and at odds with itself. I mean, I'm just back, like I said, from Michigan, where they came back with about 10 draft maps yesterday. For Congress and the State House and the State Senate. And in many ways, the commission did a terrific job. They unwound a really intense partisan gerrymander that had been put in a decade ago, but they did so by, the key to the gerrymander was packing black voters in Detroit into as few districts as possible. So effectively drawing a really wild-looking 14th district. And in the book back in, I actually drove every turn of that district, and it's insane. But the entire district effectively had the goal of really resegregating and packing as many black voters as they could into one district. And then because all of the lines affect the other lines, it would whitewash all of the surrounding seats and make them whiter. And when this commission tried to undo that, what happened, and they tried to make the map more competitive and proportional, what you see is that the black voting age population in that minority seat goes from 85% down to, say, 35 or 40%. So it's not necessarily a majority-minority seat under the Voting Rights Act. So all of these pieces can kind of come into tension. You might want to try to undo a gerrymander or make a map more competitive, but in the process, you might also be separating communities of interest or making it harder for racial minorities to elect a candidate of their own choosing.
I just want to add something to that regarding the 435-seat House. And it's been almost 100 years. It was 1929 when the cap on the House of Representatives went into place. And I wanted to mention another group, another strategy document that's been created is Our Common Purpose. I don't know how many people have heard of that, by the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. It's really fantastic. I really urge you to look it up and take a look at it if you haven't heard of it. And the nice thing about it is that they lay out both institutional changes, so changes in the ways that we run government, but it also talks about civic society. And they have some really wonderful recommendations that are paired in there. And that, in fact, is where I learned about the 1929 law that capped the House of Representatives. So it provides some history, too.
Could you elaborate on the redistricting master when they're appointed? Does it have to come, does that person come from the Committee of 9? Is it an outside person? And how is that? Just a little bit more on that.
Yeah, good question, and I'll tell you what I know, which is not a great deal. But when the process has failed at the 2 levels and it gets to the Supreme Court, then they have different ways of compelling the legislature or the commission at that point to do its job, or they can appoint, they themselves, the court appoints a special master. And that is what I believe happened for the congressional map in the last round. And David, do you know the name? It was a well-known guy from New York who actually drew those maps. Maybe it began with a P, maybe. I'm not sure, but that's what happened. The court appointed someone who was known in the field, and that's how the maps were produced.
Thank you. And then a question about the vulnerability of independent commissions. And can you speak to the situation in Michigan where Republicans are trying to control the commission as an example of the vulnerability of these commissions? Thank you.
These commissions, much like any political reform, those who are most determined to find their weaknesses will work the hardest to do so. And I think what we have seen in so many states and what is happening right now in a handful of them is that partisans have recognized the pressure points where they can have an influence on the commission. And they are determined to sort of come screaming in the windows. So for example, in Michigan, where 61% of voters said, we want the partisans and the operatives out of the room when these things are being drawn, one of the most conservative Republican law firms came howling zombie style in through the windows as the litigation counsel, and this is the firm that defended the partisan gerrymanders in Pennsylvania and North Carolina that courts overturned and that helped gerrymander Ohio. Not really who you want defending fair maps, especially if this case ends up going all the way to the US Supreme Court, perhaps even testing the very constitutionality of independent commissions. You might want a law firm on your side that actually believes in the idea of independent commissions. But I think my favorite story of this is in Arizona right now, where Republicans are so convinced that the Democrats in the last cycle found a Trojan horse to come in as the independent chair. And Arizona has got a 5-person commission, 2 Democratic political appointees, 2 Republican political appointees, and the 5th person, the all-important independent chair, is appointed through something called the Commission on Appellate Court Appointments, or CACA for short. Because you can't make this stuff up. And so Republicans think that the Democrats gained them last time, and that they may well have. And so they set out as early as 2013 to do the same thing this time. And when Doug Ducey's elected governor of Arizona in 2015, he simply stops appointing any Democrats to the commission to
Any other? Carlisle.
There's a lot of different ways that other countries do it. You know, a lot of them use nonpartisan statistical boards. A lot of them draw, you know, larger multi-member districts and elect more proportionally, and keep this power in the hands of statisticians and neutral boards. I mean, if you look across, you know, I mean, Mexico has actual, you know, bureaucratic statisticians that draw districts, and if the politicians want to adjust them, they have to show carefully, according to a handful of laid out criteria, how they're making the maps stronger and more competitive and more fair. And so, you know, if you look across Europe, you see a lot more proportional systems that simply are not single member district winner takes all, so that these lines are not as important as they might be elsewhere. You know, it's one of the other things in the a terrific report that Joan was talking about that the Academy did last year, was calling not only for a larger house, but also to perhaps even rethink the way we do US House elections themselves, and to kind of move away from single member districts that the gerrymandering is so prevalent, and create larger multi-member districts, the same a number usually from each state, the same proportion, but you would simply elect more proportionally. I mean, I'm from Massachusetts, where there's plenty of Republicans, and yet Republicans have not elected a member of the House up there since 1994. It's a long time. It's been a long time here in Connecticut, too. There's plenty of Republicans here in Connecticut. If we elected from larger multi-member districts with a more proportional system, you would actually have Democrats and Republicans from all of these states again. Instead of these maps that are so frozen in red and blue, Massachusetts has got a Republican governor. You know, it's had one Democratic governor since the days of Michael Dukakis, and yet you can't get elected to Congress on those maps, largely because of the geography of the state. And I imagine Connecticut is pretty similar. But Connecticut's got you know, and this entire region has got a really rich history I mean, I grew up with Lowell Weicker as a hero for, you know, standing up and protecting a democracy during Watergate, and his work on the Americans with the Disabilities Act. And the way that we draw districts has, I think, heightened polarization and pushed out liberal Republicans, pushed out conservative Democrats, and it's made the system sort of not work as well, because those are the folks who can kind of broker deals and come across trends.
Yeah, I just want to,
It's not working.
it's not. I just want to add that we always have to keep in mind, though, that we aren't trying to create districts that fair redistricting, fair maps, are ones that reveal, allow the underlying preferences to come into fruition, come into power, as David put it. We're not trying to falsely create some particular already defined outcome. It's really to allow those underlying preferences to come out. And, you know, in Connecticut, you know, fairly recently, we had a tie Senate. So this was not too long ago that the Connecticut Senate was tied. And it's not today. And and so those, that change, I think, can be interpreted as the reflection of a changed set of voter preferences. And I think that's really important to always keep in the forefront of our mind, that we're really trying to enable voter preferences. And that's why, you know, David's point about the voters taking the lead on this is really important. And I just want to stress that we as citizens, as league members, as whatever it is we are, we need to lean into our own power, so to speak, and step back from thinking, oh, well, I'm just a citizen, I'm just this. Instead, we need to, you know, use our tools and our analytic minds to move into the arena with confidence. So I wanted to say that. And I also wanted to say one other thing about a question that hasn't been asked, but I want to say it anyway, which is about the Voting Rights Act. We both mentioned the Voting Rights Act, and 2013 decision did dismantle the pre-clearance process. Section 2, which allows the challenge of maps on a post hoc basis, continues. But there's a big, big difference, There's a big, big difference between pre-clearance and challenge. And so that's really where, that's a really important thing.
Well, I don't know about you all, but I learned an awful lot tonight, and I really thank you so much, both of you. Thank you. And I certainly can see now why this is going to take 5 nights to get through. It's interesting, it's compelling, it's complex. I'm amazed that some of those things are even legal, but you know, that. But anyway, so thank you all for joining us tonight, and please make note of the additional 4 sessions coming up. The last 2 will be announced down the line. That'll be more like in January or so. But we hope to see you again in November and December. All right, thank you. Thank you. Thank you.